As Matt Gaetz withdraws his candidacy as Trump's Attorney General pick over allegations of sexual misconduct, some of us are still asking why Trump is picking these ridiculously unqualified candidates to serve in his cabinet. Now, remember, Trump said that most of his nominations last time were terrible because he listened to bad advice, but this time he was going to make the decisions himself and choose only the best people. How's that going for you, sir? There's a few schools of thought on why Trump is making these insane nominations, ranging from the candidates being major donors to major sycophants. Announcements that aren't just terrifying anyone who cares for the future of America's prosperity, but also putting the fear of God into many Republican lawmakers too, who are mostly gagged by Trump's threats of blackmail or public humiliation. So I would firstly point out that if these wacky candidates do make it as far as Senate confirmation, Trump majorities in both the House and the Senate, let alone the loyalty that he demands, will likely mean that some, if not all, of these MAGA morons will be confirmed. And as we know, it would be far from ideal putting people with no experience in such leadership positions, resulting in a kakistocracy of unrivaled demagoguery. The first theory is that Donald Trump is intentionally putting inappropriate candidates in to purposely crash and trash the federal government, all part of the grand plan to deconstruct the administrative state by putting the lunatics in charge of the asylum. This deconstruction plan is deeply rooted in Project 2025. It's often discussed by Steve Bannon, who arguably is one of the early architects of this anti-government rhetoric. They branded it the deep state, claimed it was corrupt, won votes over it, and then they just seek to corrupt it further with a bunch of criminals who only appear to qualify if they've worked for Fox News. You know, I'm not convinced that Trump is really smart enough for such a cunning plan. I don't think his intellect allows for doing something completely stupid as a means to facilitate the downfall of institutions. I don't think his ego can operate like that. He's a malignant narcissist who thinks that he knows best at every juncture. So I think these decisions are more about control. By selecting loyalists with a lower skill set than him, he maintains control of the departments. He doesn't want to face any opposition over decision-making because he's a control freak. So choosing people who are grateful for the role gives him the upper hand. He cares nothing for expertise. It's not important to him. It might show him up. What matters is loyalty, subordination, and obedience. That's why he chose Matt Gaetz as his first pick for Attorney General, because he's a rebel in Congress and has sworn his loyalty. Trump doesn't see sexual assault allegations as a barrier to leadership because it hasn't stopped him, and also because sexual misconduct is just foreplay to Trump. He sees it as completely normal. That's how he and people in his orbit treat women. So sex trafficking of an underage girl is not even a consideration in this choice. Unfortunately for him, the decision for Gaetz to stand aside was out of his control. It happened because of us, the public, the resistance. Outrage and public opinion matters to Trump, so he had to change course. Gaetz has screwed himself, having resigned from Congress after the nomination, despite being re-elected just earlier this month, days before a report from the House Ethics Committee was reportedly set to be released on sexual misconduct and drug allegations against him, despite Mike Johnson's refusal. Because Gaetz resigned from Congress, his seat must be filled through a special election in Florida, per the Constitution, meaning he can't just retake his place in the House or be appointed into the same seat, so expect him to show up as a Fox News host before the end of the month. Journalist Bob Woodward has spoken this week about Trump seeking to rule by fear, and some are saying that putting these outrageous candidates into top jobs maintains a level of fear in the electorate. Now, I don't buy that argument. Remember, Trump's narcissism makes him think that every move he makes is the best one, the best decision for him, but not necessarily for the country. That's who people voted for, a man who, whilst in office, will only ever do what is best for him in the moment. He's not a public servant like Obama or Harris or Biden. He's a self-interested gangster. America knowingly put a gangster into the Oval Office. Unfortunately, because gangsters have been romanticized in the movies to be cool and badass and powerful, diversity and equality were passed over in favor of toxic masculinity. The reality is that Trump is a failed gangster who keeps getting caught. I mean, he doesn't actually do anything. Apart from bring lawsuits, I mean, what are his skills? He just enriches himself to pay lawyers to get him out of being prosecuted. And by packing the Supreme Court, he effectively ring-fenced himself from any future criminality with an unprecedented immunity case. This is another reason why he had to win the election at whatever cost. The next theory I've been considering is influence. Trump is easily influenced. Despite his fake strongman persona, he's a pushover. I mean, how did Bob Woodward, after writing books critical of Trump, manage to get invited back to interview him again and again? Well, the answer is ego. Trump is painfully insecure. Anybody with half a brain and a modicum of vocabulary can manipulate Trump. They just compliment him, celebrate him, congratulate him, and within minutes he is welcoming them back into his fold and sharing national secrets. This is why Trump thinks that Putin is his friend. Meanwhile, Putin is using Trump to his own ends, to weaken the US military, to end the arming of Ukraine, and to get what he ultimately wanted, a land grab with the assistance of their comrade Donald Trump. He'll brand it as a peace deal, brokered exclusively by him, as he did with the fake Abraham Accords in the Middle East, but he will have been played, and everyone but him will see through it. This is what makes Trump so dangerous, not because he's a bully, but because he is so easily influenced. And with choices like Russian propagandist Tulsi Gabbard potentially as the director of national intelligence, Trump has fallen into yet another trap of influence, effectively handing over the nation's secrets to our enemies. Gabbard has no experience working with the nation's spy agencies and a long track record of echoing the Russian disinformation that they work to expose and to counter, a combination her critics claim should be disqualifying. It's literally like letting diabetic kids loose in a candy store, only with much deadlier consequences for all of us. Again, many of us have been warning of this stuff for years. Trump is unfit to run a golf club, let alone the most influential country in the world. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel reflected on her initial misjudgment of Trump in her memoir Freedom this week. She admits that her first mistake was treating the former US president as if he was completely normal. She quickly recognized his emotional nature and his apparent admiration for authoritarian leaders. Merkel recounts their first meeting in 2017 in the Oval Office. During the encounter, Trump attempted to humiliate her by refusing to shake her hand in front of the cameras. Rather than quietly enduring the moment, I whispered to him that we should shake hands again, Merkel writes. The moment the words left my mouth, I shook my head at myself. How could I forget that Trump knew exactly what he was doing? He wanted to create a spectacle with his behavior, while I had approached the situation as if I were speaking to someone entirely normal. Trump is playing the role of a dictator and undermining the leader of our ally, Germany, whilst fawning over Vladimir Putin. Can you see whose side he's really on? Rather than try to build bridges with traditional allies, Merkel writes, Trump was apparently fascinated with the Russian president, and she notes that politicians with autocratic and dictatorial traits had him in their thrall. On the flight home after their first talks, a deflated Merkel concluded that Trump looked at everything like the real estate developer he was before he entered politics, as a zero-sum game. For him, all countries were rivals in which the success of one meant the failure of another. He didn't think that prosperity could be increased for all through cooperation. And then there's the appointment of wealthy donors, a thank you list of white wealthy billionaires who gave the Trump campaign over $100 million each and therefore bought their way into his administration. Trump named Linda McMahon, co-chair of his transition team, his pick for education secretary. In a statement, Trump said the WWE co-founder will work to expand choice to every state in America and send education back to the states. Remember, Trump previously promised to dismantle the Department of Education, claiming that teaching children about gender and race and slavery or civil rights amounts to indoctrination. And so to solve that, they will replace the curriculum with traditional Christian Bible teaching and patriotism, otherwise known as the indoctrination of Christian nationalism. By sending education back to the states, you'll find, as with abortion, that some states will have our kids learning the truth and facts of history, and others where they'll be brainwashed and recruited to grow up as evangelical Christians with a narrow view of society and a natural instinct to vote for the GOP. Linda McMahon co-founded the AFPI, which, like the more famous Project 2025, has tried to create a policy roadmap for Donald Trump's second term. Whilst the AFPI doesn't outright advocate for abolishing the Department of Education, it supports significant reform, including deregulation and increased school choice, including reducing the influence of teachers' unions in state policy decisions, cutting Title I funding, which supports schools serving low-income students, mandating a patriotic curriculum focused on Western civilization, opposing student loan forgiveness initiatives, and forbidding transgender athletes in women's sports. So Trump's cabinet picks are a combination of choices ranging from big donors seeking power and influence, Elon Musk, to easily manipulated empty vessels for Trump to feel like he's retaining control, Dr. Oz. And among those choices, there will be influence from the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society, organizations that have been manipulating Trump for years. And much of their work is the source material for Project 2025 and Agenda 47 and America First and Reawaken America, which coincidentally is aligned with Russia's own plans for the United States. America's guardrails protecting democracy appear to have fallen. But the elimination of Matt Gaetz is proof that public protest, pressure, and patience will prevent Trump's regime from going full dictatorship. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.